In 1620, while the Mayflower was in Provincetown, 18 of its men sailed in a small shallop, searching for a place to live. They came to present-day Eastham, where they were met by a group of Nauset. After a brief but violent encounter, the English left towards today's Plymouth. In 2020, we remember this first encounter. We explore its meanings for today and tomorrow.
The following text is an excerpt from Chapter 4 of Ian Saxine's book, The Story of the First Encounter at Nauset. Chapter 4 is titled Paths from Nauset. In 1646, the first 7 families founded their new town, incorporated by the Plymouth General Court as Nauset. They gathered themselves into a congregation that same year, constructing a meeting house for that purpose. That congregational church endured and today remains in the Federated Church of Orleans. English residents renamed the town Eastham in 1651. In doing so, locals did what colonists up and down the coast were doing, renaming landmarks and communities with English names, replacing Algonquian ones. As Nauset became Eastham, so too did Wescostigo become North Yarmouth, Maine, and Shawmut became Boston. The first proprietors of the town of Eastham, like those of many New England towns, claimed ownership from multiple sources. English colonists throughout the 17th century disagreed whether native purchase or a grant from the king, so various towns traced their origins to one or the other, or both. Eastham's proprietors acquired their title in a convoluted, multi-step process that was common among New England towns. The 7 proprietors evidently reached an agreement with the Nauset for permission to move there in 1644, including some form of payment. However, if they signed a legal deal, it has not survived. Instead, the proprietors drafted a Declaration of Right and Interest after 1651, inserting it into the Plymouth Colony records, rooting the town of Nauset, now Eastham, in act of court and also by purchase from the natives. They had, on March 3, 1645, secured a grant from the General Court governing Plymouth Colony to the land, which made no reference to the Nauset. This grant was backed by no higher authority than Plymouth Colony itself, because that body existed without a charter and therefore in a legal limbo that persisted into 1691. Finally, on November 9, 1666, the town proprietors obtained signatures of the leading Nauset on a formal deal for the town land, drawn up in the appropriate language of the genre, including the record of payments, wolfskins, Indian coats, wampum, kettles, knives, along with the demarcation of boundaries, including a marked tree at the head of Namscasset. One Nauset, the English called Lieutenant Anthony, reserved a small neck to himself called Tudamonest, according to their agreement with Mr. Thomas Prence. The copy of the document currently on display in the town administrator's office lists 8 indigenous signers leaving their marks. Evaluating whether particular deeds indicate a fair transfer of land, a question 21st century people often raise, is impossible in isolation. Scholars have accounted for hundreds of New England Indian deeds, which became a legal genre unto themselves across the region. To begin with, we can look for evidence of informed Native American consent in them. Certain features can provide clues, including the signatures, almost always marks, of the sachems with appropriate authority to permit newcomers, the delineation of clear physical boundaries as opposed to measurements in English acres, which meant nothing to the native participants, and the reservation of indigenous rights to particular resources or areas. Some deeds included stipulations that the English buyers would pay annual tribute or rent for the privilege of living on the land. Recorded payment amounts are a less reliable indicator, because some transactions included illegal goods, guns and alcohol in different times and places. and because English legal forms included the phrase valuable considerations, without necessarily requiring specifying price, and not least because the indigenous signers often used some deeds to achieve political goals rather than to obtain material compensation. Other deeds did not contain these markers indicating indigenous consent. In all cases, for these early transactions, however, native sellers, including the Nauset, did not appreciate how much the English were willing to pay each other for similar quantities of land, and later generations certainly did not view the agreements as fair. The strongest indication that the Nauset consented to the 1644 and 1666 agreements is that no evidence survives that they objected when 7 Plymouth families moved to Nauset. The English remained a minority in the area for decades, and at no point did the Nauset complain to Plymouth about their presence, destroy the newcomers' property, or threaten their safety, responsive other Native Americans had towards unwanted trespassers on their land. However, deeds like the Nauset Agreement of 1666 did not occur in a vacuum, and a full evaluation of it requires acknowledging external pressures at work. The founding of Eastham was a part of a wider shift in property regimes in New England. In the early years of colonization, English arrivals secured permission to carve out tracts for their townships within indigenous spaces, which they subsequently used for their intensive version of agriculture. But it was the expansive English interpretation of common lands between indigenous villages and colonial towns that triggered the dramatic transformation of the region's ecological and property regime. As more colonists arrived and their livestock multiplied, they began to swarm into the surrounding territory that Native Americans used for hunting, gathering, fishing, and trapping. English weirs and dams spoiled upstream fisheries, and their livestock crowded out deer and other prey animals. In short, English land use practices in the common spaces between their towns and indigenous villages soon made that land useless for native subsistence strategies. As they converted indigenous lands into colonial townships, the colonists were also willing to extend limited recognition to indigenous property, but only insofar as it conformed to English ideas of property. Colonists recognized native ownership of homes and fields, but not their right to set rules about access to resources in unfenced fields, forests, and streams. Colonists insisted that they had a right to the dwindling stocks of game and fish, while their pigs and cattle rampaging through the woods were private property. Wampanoag, who adapted to this state of affairs by keeping livestock without conforming to other English expectations of civility, such as English farming techniques or conversion to Christianity, encountered resistance from colonial governments. The Nauset, like the other Wampanoag on Cape Cod, entered into agreements with the Eastham purchasers as this process of English expansion unfolded. We can see that their participation in the 1644 and 1666 agreements was part of a larger strategy of retrenchment, of protecting indigenous social and property networks by, where possible, physically removing them from proximity to colonial towns, and by securing recognition for native systems of ownership in colonial law.
My name is Lydia Holleck. I'd like to share an invitation with you regarding Eastham 400's other series, the Campfire Series. The Campfire Series is a series of hour-long presentations each Sunday in July and August that delve more deeply into some of the topics we discuss here on the Sunset Series. We are happy to announce that our last campfire will be held in person. On Sunday, August 30th, the campfires will occur at the Eastham Windmill at 6 p.m. The same program that was presented on August 23rd will be shared again, featuring John Hanlon, who has led the campfire programs at the Cape Cod National Seashore for the past 20 years, and Linda Coombs of the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe. Admission is free, but registration is required. Please sign up for these events using the form on eastham400.org. We are looking forward to these events and hope to see you there.